The Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter.
Welcome to the Formed Book Club. We are on an exciting journey now. We are going through Chesterton's Orthodoxy, wonderful book he wrote in 1908. He was not a Catholic yet. He's telling the story of how he came to accept what we call Orthodoxy. He himself was a very brilliant young man, not a believer, decided to develop his own philosophy of life, which he did, and he found out, oh my gosh, I didn't invent this, it was already there, So now he's explaining how he came to that, and in the first chapter, called In Defense of Everything Else, after his introduction, he says on page 14, I just want to quote this at the bottom here, because what he's not trying to prove or defend here is this: the thing I do not propose to prove, the thing I propose to take as common ground between myself and my average reader, is this desirability of an active and imaginative life, picturesque and full of poetical curiosity. A life such as Western men, at any rate, always seem to have desired. So he's basing this kind of on what is our deepest desire? What do we really want out of life, What kind of meaning do we want to try and find in it? And he's going to show how he discovered that. And he's not directly trying to prove the truth of Orthodoxy, but rather describing how he was seeking fulfillment and, a flourishing life and truth, came to accept Orthodoxy. So
I think, Father, that we one of you, I think, mentioned last week or the time before that there are parallels here between Chesterton's Orthodoxy and Newman's Apologia. I mean, it is a defense of the faith. It's a defense of the faith in very autobiographical terms. And I think that's what this is his journey, right, to discover Orthodoxy as if by accident. And again, and Newman was the same, right? He wasn't looking to become a Catholic, but all of his searching kept leading him inexorably in the same direction. And both of these men, being honest and having integrity, followed their reason and their consciences.
And their hearts.
Indeed, and their hearts. Heart speaks to heart, as Newman would say.
Yes, and so we moved into the second chapter called The Maniac. And he is going to, we're on page 27, I believe, in The Maniac, where he talks about materialism. But here, again, what he claims to do, and I think he's trying to do it, and I think he succeeds, is not trying to prove that dogma that the church teaches is true, but that it's sane, that it's the only healthy doctrine you can have. So Joseph, with that little introduction, I'll leave it to you now as our guide.
Well, that was a perfect lead-in, actually, Father, because the first passage I have highlighted is the beginning of that new paragraph on page 29, that one succinct sentence there. Spiritual doctrines do not actually limit the mind as do materialist denials. So this is obviously very important because, we live his age and ours over 100 years later, somehow or other, to believe in spiritual truths, to believe in Catholic doctrines or dogmas somehow limits or narrows the mind. And what he's saying here basically, on the contrary, it's materialist denials that lead to a reductionism, which is ultimately reductio ad absurdum, which narrows the mind. And then he gives loads of examples of it, which we could, that's the trouble, just show you. Everything's highlighted. This is Chesterton, but he sets it up basically for the following pages are showing how materialism, philosophical materialism, leads to a reductionism and a narrowing of the mind until reason itself becomes, the two possibilities, there's nothing but matter, in which case, paradoxically, nothing matters, or even more reductionistic, we can't even be sure that matter exists, right? The sort of the Schopenhauer reductionism of the only thing we can be sure of is mind. and our own mind. And I think he uses the analogy of the dream. But he does here. This is 2/3 down of 3/4 of that way down, page 31. Of course, if you want to back up, feel free. But for the sake of simplicity, it is easier to state the notion by saying that a man can believe that he is always in a dream. Now, obviously, there can be no positive proof given to him that he is not in a dream, for the simple reason that no proof can be offered that might not be offered in a dream. All right, so you end up in this reductionism leads to ultimate madness, because you can either prove nor disprove that we are living in a permanent dream, which is in reality a nightmare.
Yes, and that is a link to his chapter titled The Maniac, where he says insanity, or being a maniac, is not the loss of reason, but it's rather the excess of reason to the exclusion of other things, other experiences, so that it's hard to argue on a purely reasonable basis with someone who is completely rational, except their conclusions lead to nonsense,
Yeah,
exactly. I want to say
exactly.
some things before we go. You go first, Vivian. You had some things to say, or
No, not yet.
well, I want to back up a bit, Joseph.
Yeah.
On page 27, that new paragraph there, which says, take first the obvious case of materialism as an explanation, that is a reasonable explanation of the world. Materialism has a sort of insane simplicity. It has just the quality of the madman's argument. We have at once a sense that it's covering everything and the sense of leaving everything out. So that's one thing. On page 28, the top paragraph there, it must be understood that I'm not now discussing the relation of these creatures of truth, but for the present, solely the relation to health, and then finally on page 29, the bottom there, again, now he's on a conclusion, because if you're a materialist, that there's nothing spiritual, there's no free will, everything is a result of material processes. Well, 4 lines up, he says, it is absurd to say that you're especially advancing freedom when you only use free thought to destroy free will. That is, free thought being, let's speculate on how to explain the world, the universe, and my materialistic conclusion is that there's nothing but matter. Well, nothing but matter means that everything is determined by physical laws. Mm-hmm. If it's all determined by physical laws, then your thoughts, therefore, are unfounded. Yeah. And your will is you're not free because you're determined. Go ahead.
But the irony is here, of course, this is used by materialists as an excuse to do what they like. In other words, if there's nothing but mechanism, then there's no such thing as morality. There's no such thing as morality. I can do what I want. So it's ironic that this is sometimes just used as a rationalization of being able to do what we like. So in denying free will, they're really denying free will in order to practice license, which there's an irony and an absurdity there, but nonetheless, that's for many of them, that's the motivation.
Well, and then the very same thing he says on page 30 at the bottom of that paragraph against the page, about 5 lines up. You may say, if you like, that the bold determinist speculator is free to disbelieve in the reality of the will. Because again, you can't be making choices if everything is determined, right? But it's a much more massive and important fact that he is not free, if he believes in determinism, to praise, to curse, to thank, to justify, to urge, to punish, to resist temptation, to incite mobs, to make New Year's resolutions, to pardon sinners, to rebuke tyrants, or even to say, thank you for the mustard. Because if I pass you the mustard, why say thank you to me if it was going to happen anyway? It was part of the deterministic, laws of nature.
There's a form of materialism in Indian Hindu sect. I guess it's even older than Hinduism. Jainism is what it's called. And I was talking, and so they're also materialists of a different sort, but I'm talking to this young man, asking him to explain Jainism, and he goes like this. My hand did that. I didn't do that. My hand did that.
Oh, God help us. God help
I
us.
just thought, okay.
That reminds me of your son Stephen at a young age.
Yeah.
When he knocked over a glass at the table.
Yes.
And he said, "What, my ring did?
My watch did it."
My watch did it.
He sure did.
It was worth a try. I've got some comments in the margin, Father, just as a comment upon that passage just read, and you just commented upon yourself. So I think there's another irony here, because these materialists are in not practicing what they preach. In other words, they do thank you for the mustard. They do curse and thank and incite mobs. We know they incite mobs. This is not hypocrisy, but madness, because a hypocrite believes one thing and does another. A materialist believes one thing and does another. The thing he says it's impossible to do. So the point is they're not hypocrites, because a hypocrite mean that I really believe in free will, but I'm denying it. I'm sure there are some materialists that are in that position.
Well, yes, there are
but
many people who are naturalist materialists who are urging us, save the planet.
Right.
Get rid of the carbon footprint.
Exactly.
Climate change is destroying us. We must resist. Wait a minute. If we're not free, it's going to happen no matter what we do,
Right. Precisely.
Please don't give me moral exhortations if you don't believe in free will.
Couldn't put it better myself. Yes, the reduction ad absurdum. That if they're genuine, they're not hypocrites. They're mad. That's the only alternative. You're mad because you're basically saying something which can't be true according to your own first principles. So that's madness, insanity. Or you're a hypocrite. You don't really believe what the philosophy that you're preaching. One or the other, right?
No, I think there's a third one, and that is that at the end of the day, they are men, and they're better than their own thoughts would have them behave. And so it isn't necessarily hypocrisy, isn't necessarily madness, but it certainly is inconsistency. And we can be grateful that they are inconsistent with what they really believe, right? That there's a humanness there that will not be repressed, no matter how your thoughts go against your own humanity. And related to this, I wanted to point out that one of the factors that leads people to look for overly simplistic explanations of things is precisely because living with apparent contradictions or living with complexity is challenging sometimes if you overthink it. And so trying to reduce everything to a simple explanation. And I love this on the bottom of 32, where Chesterton talks about the ordinary man is more able to live with these things than perhaps the overthinking man, shall I say. Okay, so he says the ordinary man has always been sane because the ordinary man has always been a mystic. He has permitted the twilight. He has always had one foot in earth and the other in fairyland. He has always left himself free to doubt his gods, but unlike the agnostic of today, free also to believe in them. He has always cared more for truth than for consistency. If he saw two truths that seemed to contradict each other, he would take the two truths and the contradiction along with them. His spiritual sight is stereoscopic. Like his physical sight, he sees two different pictures at once, and yet he sees all the better for that. The person who can just live with things the way they are isn't as tempted, perhaps, as these overthinkers who try to cram everything into their system.
Yeah, and I agree. But again, the other thing that we have to keep in mind, and parallel to that, what we were saying earlier, that a lot of materialists are not overthinkers but underthinkers, right? They don't bother to actually look at the logical ramifications of their reductionism. They just that's why they end up saying they believe one thing and doing something which contradicts it. So there are overthinkers that try to get the cosmos into their head. And there are underthinkers that don't think deeply enough to actually see the inconsistencies and incoherences of their position.
But I love this statement that Chesterton sums up the thought I just quoted on top of 33. It is exactly this balance of apparent contradictions that has been the whole buoyancy of the healthy man.
Yeah, and I would say, by the way, that sentence encapsulates in some part of my own conversion, which was largely due to Chesterton. I began to perceive paradoxes as doorways, wardrobes into a deeper perception of reality. They weren't contrary to reason, but they challenged the simplification or the underthinking, and made us made us think a bit more deeply. That the apparent contradiction made us look at the contradiction and come to truths that are deeper than that. And so this idea of seeing things paradoxically, seeing paradoxes in everything, was a major part of my own conversion, and I got this from Chesterton in general, and this book largely in particular.
And we've gone over in our book club one of Henri de Lubac's books, Paradox and Mystery, or Mystery and Paradox, which are the two words he uses to sum up the truth and the church herself. Paradox and mystery.
And I permit myself an excursus here, which is not really to the point, but is loosely related to what I've been saying. When I was at the Bishop's Synod in 1987, in a circulus minor, a small circle of English speakers from A to G, sitting next to Cardinal Rinze, wonderful African cardinal, and it was being chaired by Cardinal Joseph Bernardin, who was known for his kind of diplomacy or, friendliness at all positions and so on. And so Cardinal Rinze summed it up. Yes, someone stands up and says, this is the case. And Bernardin says, oh, very good, very good. Someone else stands up and says, no, that's exactly wrong. Bernardin says, oh, very good, very good. And someone third said, but they contradict each other. Oh, very good, very good. So, you never focus on but the healthy thing is to accept paradox. I realize that. But it can be misplaced in diplomacy.
Well, then the person is
actually... The lassitude of Bernardin, I think speaks for itself, and the goodness of Arenze. But I think the mystery and paradox, the mystery and paradox of the mystery and paradox is they don't contradict reason.
They're not contradictions, exactly.
Exactly, because if we're going to say mystery, it's a mystery as a way of not having to be rational, or it's a paradox as a way of not having to be rational. Then we end up going in all sorts of weird directions. So the real secret is that paradox and mystery are not against reason.
Yes, I want to continue for the sentence that one of you read, just 33 there, but the healthy man. About 7 lines down, he says, the whole secret of mysticism is this: that man can understand everything by the help of what he does not understand. That's really profound. And he'll use the analogy of the sun. We can't look at the sun directly. It's a blur, it's a blaze. But everything we see is illuminated by the sun. So for something we can't fully grasp or address or comprehend, or, it's what enlightens everything else. Same here with the mystery of the Trinity, the mystery of God. By the way, just on that, the Trinity. If God were not Trinity, he could not have created the universe outside him out of love. Because love requires two persons or more. So if God were not multi-personal, he would have no one to love. He would create the universe in order to have someone to love. He would be dependent upon the universe to be loved. But because he's already love, already tri-personal, he doesn't need to create something other in order to have an object of his love and his affection. He does it out of perfect grace, perfect generosity. So again, that's an example of how something we don't understand, the Trinity, can help to illuminate the fact that we are creatures of a God.
Very, very good. Very good.
There's a few more things in this chapter I was going to kind of quote here. Middle of the page, 33. As we've taken the circle as a symbol of reason and madness, round and round and round, and never expanding beyond that circle, we may very well take the cross as a symbol at once of mystery and of faith and of health. Buddhism is centripetal, but Christianity is centrifugal, breaks out. For the circle is perfect and infinite in its nature, but it is a fixture of every. Well, that's not quite true. You can't say a circle is fixed in its size. You can have bigger, longer circles, but still, they all contain. You can't break out of the circle. The circle is something which is self-contained.
Yeah, and I also think that so geometrically, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know my Euclid, but my understanding of a circle is it is the smallest area to be encompassed by a circumference, not by a boundary. All right. In other words, it's as small as you can get geometrically. Right. Everything else is going to be is not going to be bigger in terms of the boundary that's contained by the area within it. So in other words, that it's a perfect circle. It's a perfect symbol also of reductionism. Right? You're going to reduce everything as far as you possibly can, distill it until you have nothing but matter or nothing but mind. Right? That's as small as it can possibly get. It's self-enclosed, self-contained, and does not contain the most important things that are outside of it.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, it's not the definition of circle, but it's the property of the circle. That's right. If the circumference is a length, and you want to enclose an area with that amount of length, a square, a triangle will not do it as well as a circle. A circle will give you the maximum area for that length, which becomes a diameter. Yeah, that's true. But he goes on. But the cross, though it has at its heart a collision and a contradiction, that is, up and down versus left and right, vertical versus horizontal, can extend its forearms forever without altering its shape. Because it has a paradox at its center, it can grow without changing. The circle returns upon itself and is bound. The cross opens its arms to the four winds. It is a signpost for free travelers. I mean, you don't want to make too much of symbols, but the fact is, Chesterton does see in certain symbols, an incarnation of, an expression of spiritual truths. He goes on. Symbols alone are even of a cloudy value in speaking of this deep matter. And another symbol from physical nature will express sufficiently well the real place of mysticism before mankind. The one created thing which we cannot look at is the one thing in the light of which we look at everything, which is the sun. End of the paragraph there, a few lines up. We are conscious of it as a kind of splendid confusion. It is something both shining and shapeless, at once a blaze and a blur. That's the sun. But the circle of the moon is as clear and unmistakable, as recurrent and inevitable as the circle of Euclid on a blackboard. For the moon is utterly reasonable, and the moon is the mother of lunatics and has given to them all her name. How did he give them her name? The Latin word for moon is luna. So lunatic is moon-like, moonshine, mooning or something. But his idea there is it's sharp, it's clear, you can circumscribe it, you can look at it, but it doesn't illumine much.
In fact, it only reflects the light of something else.
Exactly. Anything else?
I like that because that's the whole point. I think that a lunatic does not see the light itself, but something which is reflected by the light, or that reflects the light. So they're not seeing the thing itself, but a part of it. And then a large part of Chesterton's approach in this and in other works is that that heresy is not the absence of truth, it's the magnification of a part of the truth out of proportion to its place. So that's what a lunatic does. It's seeing the light of the sun, but it's not seeing the sun, it's only seeing it through the light of the moon. In other words, through something which is twilight, something which is not in the fullness of light, but in the shadow, right? And I think that's the point. Is it is still all reason has to be come from the one light, right? From Logos himself. But if you're only going to see part of it and ignore or exclude the rest, then you're going to end up, and instead of being somebody who walks in the light of the sun, you're going to be a lunatic. Somebody who walks at night.
Well, now compare that with Plato's allegory of the cave. The people are looking, the light is behind them and they're facing the wall, and all they're seeing are the shadows. So what has to happen is they have to be turned around to see the source of the light, and then in the light of see things as they are.
Yep. Amen.
I have a little story I'm going to indulge myself in, and have you indulge me. When I first came back to the United States in the early 70s, the charismatic movement was really flourishing here. And I got to know it, and I supported it. I was not a charismatic myself, but the ones that I knew were good, Orthodox, serious, and they had their way of spirituality, and so it's fine. But I went to one of my first charismatic big conferences. And after it was over, I met this guy, said hello, and he said hello. And I said, well, what do you do? He says, I love Jesus. I said, well, yeah, I do too, but what do you do? And I love Jesus. I said, well, but how do you do that? Or do you have it? No, I just love Jesus. I said, well, I'm sorry. That may be true, but I want a little more definition of what specific things you do to incarnate that love. But it was overly simplistic. It was a circle, where I couldn't find out what was inside. Anyway,
well, now can I tell my story?
Oh, tell your story.
Like, it's similar. So I was, and then we'll have to close, I realize, for the next session.
We're short.
But so I was downtown having lunch with a friend, and I was going to take the subway back home, and I had forgotten that on that day was the Folsom Street Fair, which in San Francisco is an outdoor celebration of S&M. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I go down to the subway station, and the whole station is filled with men half dressed in leather and chains and dog collars and I felt like I must have been in one of the circles of the inferno. It was so disturbing and everything. And I was about to go back up to another platform and figure out another way to get home, because I was the only woman down there, and I was certainly the only non-S&M kink whatever down there. And as I was about to go back upstairs, I see this man standing in a corner, a black man standing in a corner with a sign, Jesus loves you. That he's just standing in the corner holding the sign. So I felt like, this is like being in a Flannery O'Connor story. I'm going to go over and talk to that guy. So I go over to him and I say, brother, do you mind if I just stand here with you while I wait for the train? Because as you can see, and he just nods. So I'm standing next to him, of course. So where are you from? He was from the Dominican Republic. I said, oh, you're far away from home. He just nods. I say, so, carrying this sign, have you been carrying this sign? Do you just carry this sign everywhere? He just nods. I said, so as you go through the world carrying this sign, what happens? He said, well, people like you come up to me and start to talk. And I say, and do you respond? He says, no, I just nod and point to the sign. So then I said, so, well, what kinds of people come up to you besides people like me? Like what? He goes, well, they come in two varieties. They either come up to me and they're very, very angry, and they start yelling and cursing and, on and on and on. And I don't say anything. I just point to the sign. So then I said, okay, that's very interesting. And he says, and the other kind of person that comes up to me starts confessing their sins. And next thing I know, they're crying and they're going on and on about this and that and this and that. And I say, and what do you say to them? He says, nothing. I just point to the sign.
And
So
that is
this, so
absolute
this,
wisdom. You say a Flannery O'Connor story, or or one of the great works of Russian literature with the Holy Fall. I mean, this is
yes,
profound wisdom. Or King Lear, poor Tom in King Lear. I mean, this is exactly where we're going to find wisdom, and that's paradoxical, right? That's not going to satisfy the logician, right?
so
It's
it might
beautiful.
have been simple, but and he just said, as a boy I don't know how old he was, in the Dominican Republic, God told him to go through the world with this sign, and he has been faithfully doing that ever since.
Wow.
And and then my train came. I got on
Vivian, you had a close encounter with a saint, I would suggest.
for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Well, this is a good place to close our discussion on the chapter on the maniac, because to the eyes of the world, this man was mad.
Yeah.
Yes.
But to the eyes of faith, the eyes of common sense and reason, this man was a saint.
Yes.
All right, we'll see you next episode.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Forum Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at forumedbookclub.ignatius.com.